What if I told you that the easiest person to defeat isn't the weakest one? It's the person who's absolutely convinced they're right. Because the moment someone starts questioning their own judgment, they stop thinking clearly. They hesitate. They overanalyze. And without realizing it, they begin following your lead instead of trusting their own mind. This is why the most dangerous people rarely argue. They don't overpower you with intelligence. They quietly reshape the way you think until you reach the conclusion they wanted all along. Machiavelli understood this better than almost anyone. Real power isn't forcing people to agree with you. It's making them question themselves. And today, you're going to learn the 7 dark psychology tricks behind that hidden advantage. Before you can outsmart anyone, you first need to understand why intelligent people become confused in the first place. The human brain hates uncertainty. When reality doesn't match expectations, the mind immediately searches for answers, even if those answers are incomplete or completely wrong. That's why people who understand psychology often outperform people who rely only on logic. A sharp mind without psychological awareness is like a sword without a hand to hold it. Today's lesson isn't about manipulation for its own sake. It's about learning how influence really works, recognizing psychological pressure when it's used against you, and understanding why some people always seem to stay 3 moves ahead. These are 7 psychological strategies inspired by Machiavellian thinking that reveal how influence is built beneath the surface of every conversation, every negotiation, every relationship. Stay until the end. Because trick number 7 is the one almost nobody talks about, and it might be the most powerful one on this entire list. Before we move forward, I want you to drop this affirmation in the comments. I think before I react. Let's begin. Number 1. Make them question their own thinking. Your brain is not just recording what's happening around you. It's constantly predicting what's about to happen next. Every second, without you even noticing, your mind builds a small model of reality and expects the world to match that model. When someone talks to you, your brain predicts their next sentence. When you walk into a room, your brain predicts what you'll see. This prediction system is so automatic that you never feel it working. You just feel confident. You feel like you understand what's going on. But here's where it gets interesting. When reality breaks that prediction, even slightly, something happens inside the mind that most people never learn to name. Psychologists call it cognitive dissonance. It's the mental discomfort that hits you when 2 things you believe don't line up anymore. Let's say someone is completely convinced of something. Maybe they believe they're the smartest person in the room. Maybe they believe they always make rational choices. Maybe they believe they can read people perfectly. Now imagine that belief gets challenged, not with an argument, but with a simple contradiction. Suddenly their mind doesn't feel steady anymore. It feels itchy, uncomfortable, like an unfinished sentence hanging in the air. This discomfort is not weakness, it's biology. The brain hates unresolved tension the same way your body hates hunger. It wants to close the loop. It wants an answer, any answer, just to make the discomfort stop. And this is exactly where influence begins. When you make someone question their own thinking, even for a moment, you create a small crack in their certainty. And once that crack appears, their mind starts searching frantically for something to fill it. If you're patient, if you stay calm and composed while they're spinning internally, you become the most stable point in the room. Their mind, desperate for resolution, starts leaning toward your version of reality, simply because it offers relief from the discomfort. Think about how this works in real conversations. Someone states an opinion with total confidence. Instead of arguing directly, You ask a quiet question, not aggressive, not confrontational, just a simple question that doesn't fit their assumption. Are you sure about that? What if it's the opposite? You're not attacking them, you're planting a seed of uncertainty. The average person doesn't even realize what just happened. They think they're still in control of the conversation. But internally, their prediction system just got disrupted. Their confidence, the very thing that made them feel powerful, is now working against them. They start replaying the conversation. They start doubting their first instinct. And the moment someone starts doubting themselves, they stop moving forward with strength. They start moving carefully, cautiously, searching for reassurance. This is the first lesson in psychological influence. You don't need to prove someone wrong. You only need to make them uncertain enough that they stop trusting their own conclusions. Certainty is armor. Once you find a way to loosen it, even slightly, everything else becomes easier. Machiavelli never wrote about brain chemistry, but he understood the outcome perfectly. He knew that people who feel completely secure in their beliefs are the hardest to influence, and people who feel a flicker of doubt become surprisingly easy to guide. This is why the wisest strategists rarely attack head-on. They introduce small inconsistencies and let the other person's own mind do the rest of the work. Remember this: the moment doubt enters someone's mind, they stop leading and start following, whether they realize it or not. Drop this affirmation in the comments: my certainty is my strength. Number 2, pull the hidden psychological strings. Every decision a person makes looks conscious on the surface. They believe they weighed the facts, thought it through, and arrived at a logical conclusion. But underneath that surface, there are invisible forces pulling the strings long before logic even enters the room. If you learn to see these forces, you gain a level of understanding that most people will never have about themselves, let alone about others. Let's break down 5 of these hidden psychological pressure points. The first is expectation. Human beings don't experience the world as it truly is. They experience it through the lens of what they expect to see. If you tell someone in advance that a person is trustworthy, they will notice every trustworthy signal and ignore the warning signs. If you tell them the opposite, their mind will do the reverse. This is why first impressions carry so much power. Once an expectation is planted, the mind bends reality to match it. The second is identity. People don't just want to be right, they want to protect who they believe they are. If someone sees themselves as generous, appealing to that identity will move them faster than any logical argument. If someone sees themselves as strong, challenging their pride will provoke a reaction that pure facts never could. Identity is the emotional core underneath every decision, and whoever speaks to that identity holds real influence. The third is certainty. As we just covered, the brain craves resolution. People will often choose a worse option simply because it feels more certain than a better option that feels ambiguous. This is why confident presentation, even without solid substance, often wins over hesitant honesty. Certainty feels safe, even when it shouldn't. The fourth is social proof. Humans are wired to look at what others are doing before deciding what they should do. If people believe a certain choice is popular, accepted, or expected by others around them, they gravitate toward it, even against their private judgment. This is why crowds move together and why isolated individuals are far easier to influence than someone surrounded by support. The fifth is time pressure. When people feel rushed, their thinking shifts from careful analysis to fast, instinctive reaction. Under time pressure, the analytical brain steps back and the emotional brain takes over. Decisions made under urgency are rarely decisions made with full clarity. Now here's what makes this trick so powerful. These 5 forces are working on every person, every single day, whether anyone points them out or not. Most people go through life completely unaware that expectation, identity, certainty, social proof, and time pressure are shaping nearly everything they choose. They believe they are thinking freely. In reality, they're often reacting to invisible pressure they never consciously noticed. Someone who understands these forces doesn't need to argue louder or prove more points. They simply adjust the conditions around a person, and the person's own mind does the persuading from the inside. Shift someone's expectation before a conversation even starts, and you've already shaped how they'll interpret everything that follows. Speak to someone's identity instead of their logic, and you'll move them further than facts ever could. Offer a sense of urgency instead of endless time to decide. And watch how quickly hesitation turns into action. This is not about tricking people into something harmful. It's about understanding that human behavior is never purely rational. It's shaped by forces running quietly underneath the surface, and the person who can see those forces clearly holds an advantage that logic alone will never provide. Now I want you to drop this affirmation in the comments. I see what others miss. Number 3. Create confusion without creating conflict. Most people believe that disagreement always has to look like conflict. Raised voices, direct opposition, a clear winner and a clear loser. But the most effective psychological strategists rarely operate this way because open conflict makes people defensive, and defensive people become almost impossible to influence. Their guard goes up, their mind locks into protecting their position, and any attempt at persuasion bounces right off them. There is a quieter, far more effective approach. It's called controlled contradiction, and it works by introducing subtle inconsistency instead of direct disagreement. Here's how it functions. Instead of telling someone they're wrong, you simply present information, tone, or behavior that doesn't perfectly match what they expected. You don't attack their position. You don't raise your voice. You just create a small gap between what they assumed and what's actually happening. This gap doesn't feel like an argument. It feels like confusion, and confusion, unlike conflict, doesn't trigger defensiveness. It triggers curiosity and unease instead. Think about how this plays out. Someone expects you to react a certain way based on how you've always reacted before. Instead, you respond calmly, unpredictably, or with an answer that doesn't fit the pattern they expected. Their mind pauses. They can't immediately categorize what just happened. There's no clear enemy to fight, no clear disagreement to argue against, just an inconsistency they can't quite explain. This is where the real power lies. A confused mind becomes deeply occupied trying to resolve the inconsistency in front of it. Instead of focusing outward, planning their next move, or asserting their position, their attention turns inward. They start replaying the moment, searching for explanations, trying to make sense of what doesn't add up. While they're busy solving that internal puzzle, they've completely stopped pushing against you. This is the key difference between confusion and conflict. Conflict makes people fight harder for their position. Confusion makes people question their position altogether. A person who feels attacked digs in. A person who feels confused starts second-guessing themselves, wondering if maybe they misunderstood something, wondering if maybe their first instinct was wrong. Machiavellian thinkers have used this approach for centuries, not through dramatic manipulation, but through subtle inconsistency. Say one thing, then behave in a way that slightly contradicts it, just enough to create doubt, but not enough to seem suspicious. Respond warmly one moment, and with quiet distance the next. Agree with part of someone's argument while gently undermining another part. None of these moves look like conflict from the outside. They simply plant small seeds of uncertainty that grow into confusion over time. The brilliance of this trick is that it never gives the other person a clear target. You can't fight an enemy you can't identify. You can't argue against confusion the way you argue against opposition. This is why confused people, more often than not, become more agreeable, more cautious, and far more open to being guided, simply because their mind is too busy untangling the inconsistency to resist anything else. Controlled contradiction isn't about being dishonest. It's about understanding that certainty invites resistance, while gentle unpredictability invites reflection. And reflection, more often than confrontation, is where real influence quietly takes root. Drop this affirmation in the comments. Calm minds win silently. Number 4. Make silence. Do the talking. In a world where everyone rushes to fill every gap in conversation, silence has become one of the rarest and most underestimated tools of influence. Most people treat silence like an uncomfortable void that needs to be fixed immediately. The moment a pause lasts more than a second or two, they jump in to fill it, often revealing more than they intended to. Understanding this single tendency gives you an enormous advantage. Strategic pauses are one of the simplest, yet most powerful psychological tools available. When you ask a question and then simply stay quiet, resisting the urge to add extra explanation or soften the moment, something remarkable happens to the other person. The silence starts to feel heavy. Their mind begins searching for something, anything to fill that space. And more often than not, they will fill it with information they never planned to share. Why does this happen? Because silence creates psychological pressure. Human beings are deeply uncomfortable with unresolved moments. A pause after a question feels like an open loop. And just like we discussed with cognitive dissonance, the brain wants to close that loop as quickly as possible. If you refuse to speak first, the pressure to resolve the discomfort shifts entirely onto the other person. Watch what happens in real conversations when someone gives a short or evasive answer, and instead of accepting it and moving on, you simply wait. You don't repeat the question, you don't rephrase it, you just hold eye contact and stay silent. 9 times out of 10, the other person will speak again, offering more detail, more explanation, sometimes even the truth they were originally trying to avoid. This works because uncomfortable people often reveal information voluntarily, simply to escape the discomfort of silence. It's not that they wanted to share more, it's that the silence became more uncomfortable than the risk of saying too much. This is why patience is often more powerful than persuasion. A persuasive argument can be countered, questioned, or resisted. But silence gives the other person nothing to push against. There's no pressure to defend against, no logic to dismantle, just an open space that their own mind rushes to fill. Think about negotiations, difficult conversations, or moments where someone is trying to convince you of something. The person who talks the most usually reveals the most, while the person who stays composed and quiet gathers information, maintains control, and never overexposes their own position. Silence isn't weakness, it's restraint. And restraint, in the right moment, carries more weight than 100 carefully chosen words. Machiavelli understood that those who reveal too much lose their advantage, while those who withhold speech maintain command over the moment. The next time you're in a conversation and someone stops talking, resist the instinct to immediately jump in. Let the silence stretch a little longer than feels comfortable. Watch what happens. More often than not, the truth will step forward on its own, simply because silence gave it room to breathe. I want you to drop this affirmation in the comments. My silence speaks louder. Number 5. Become impossible to predict. Predictability feels safe, but in reality it's one of the biggest weaknesses a person can carry. When your reactions, your habits, and your emotional responses become easy to anticipate, you hand other people a roadmap to influence you without even realizing it. Once someone knows exactly how you'll respond to praise, criticism, pressure, or silence, they no longer need to guess. They simply push the right button and wait for the predictable result. This is why unpredictability, used with intention, becomes one of the most powerful psychological tools available. Not chaos, not randomness for its own sake. Calculated unpredictability, built on two specific strategies: pattern disruption and calibrated withdrawal. Let's start with pattern disruption. Every relationship, whether personal or professional, develops patterns over time. People learn how you usually respond to certain situations, and once that pattern is established, they stop paying close attention to you because they believe they already understand you completely. Pattern disruption means deliberately breaking that expected rhythm. Where you would normally respond quickly, you take your time. Where you would normally explain yourself, you simply let your actions speak. Where you would normally seek approval, you show quiet indifference. This disruption forces the other person's brain to stop coasting on assumptions and start paying attention again. Remember what we covered earlier about prediction. When reality doesn't match what someone expects, their mind experiences discomfort until it resolves the gap. Pattern disruption creates that gap intentionally. Suddenly, the person who thought they understood you completely is left wondering what changed, why you're behaving differently, and what it means. Their attention snaps back to you instantly. Now combine this with calibrated withdrawal. This is the subtle art of pulling back your energy, attention, or availability at strategic moments, not out of anger, not out of coldness, but with quiet control. When you're always available, always eager, always emotionally present, people take that consistency for granted. But when you calmly withdraw a little, without explanation, without drama, it creates a psychological vacuum. People notice absence far more intensely than they notice presence. This is not about playing games or manipulating emotions carelessly. It's about understanding a basic truth of human psychology. People chase what feels slightly uncertain, and they take for granted what feels permanently secured. A person who is always predictable becomes background noise. A person who occasionally breaks the pattern, who occasionally becomes harder to read, remains constantly present in someone's mind, precisely because their behavior can't be fully mapped out in advance. Machiavelli himself warned rulers against becoming too predictable, because predictable leaders become easy targets for manipulation and betrayal. The same principle applies to everyday life. When you become too easy to read, people stop respecting your boundaries because they already know exactly how far they can push before you react. Calculated unpredictability keeps people emotionally invested, mentally attentive, and constantly trying to understand you, rather than assuming they already do. This isn't about becoming cold or distant for the sake of manipulation. It's about protecting your own psychological ground, refusing to become a pattern that other people can exploit without effort. Drop this affirmation in the comments. I control my own pattern. Number 6. Change the battlefield before they notice. Most arguments are lost or won long before anyone realizes the real battle has already shifted. People assume that persuasion happens through logic, evidence, and strong points, but the most skilled psychological strategists understand something deeper. Whoever controls the frame of a conversation controls the outcome, often without the other person ever noticing the shift happened. This trick combines two closely related techniques, reframing and projection inversion. Let's start with reframing. Every conversation operates inside an invisible frame, a set of assumptions about what the discussion is really about. If someone accuses you of being selfish, and you respond by defending why you're not selfish, you've already accepted their frame. You're now playing on their battlefield, using their definitions, fighting on the terms they set. A far more effective approach is to reframe the conversation entirely. Instead of defending against their frame, you shift the conversation toward a different angle altogether. Maybe you calmly point out that setting boundaries isn't selfishness, it's self-respect. Suddenly, the entire foundation of the accusation has changed. You're no longer defending yourself inside their definition. You've redefined the terms of the discussion, and now they're the one adjusting to your frame instead of the other way around. This is one of the most underestimated skills in influence. The person who accepts the original frame is already fighting from a weaker position, regardless of how strong their argument is. The person who reframes the conversation controls where the discussion goes next. Now combine this with projection inversion. This technique involves recognizing when someone accuses you of something that actually reflects their own behavior or insecurity, and instead of denying it outright, you calmly redirect attention back toward the pattern they're displaying, not through direct accusation, but through composed observation. For example, someone might criticize you for being distant, when in reality, their own inconsistency created the distance in the first place. Instead of becoming defensive, you might calmly note the pattern you've noticed in their behavior. Without anger, without accusation, just quiet observation. This shifts the psychological weight of the conversation. Suddenly they're no longer comfortably attacking. They're now reflecting on their own actions because the spotlight has quietly moved in their direction. The most influential people rarely argue inside someone else's frame. They recognize the frame being presented, and instead of accepting its terms, they quietly shift the conversation until the other person begins defending their own position instead. This requires composure, patience, and awareness, qualities that Machiavelli valued far more than raw aggression. Changing the battlefield doesn't mean avoiding truth or dodging accountability. It means refusing to let someone else control the terms of every conversation simply because they spoke first or spoke loudest. When you learn to notice the frame being set around you, you gain the ability to calmly move the entire conversation onto ground where clarity, not emotional pressure, determines the outcome. Drop this affirmation in the comments. I choose the frame. Number 7. Reveal less, influence more. This final trick is the one most people overlook completely, yet it might be the most powerful of them all. In a world obsessed with oversharing, constant explanation, and proving yourself at every opportunity, restraint has become a rare and quietly commanding trait. The less predictable, less explained, and less exposed you are, the more psychological weight your words and actions naturally carry. This comes down to something called information asymmetry. In any relationship, negotiation, or interaction, whoever holds more information than they reveal maintains a hidden advantage, not through deception, but through selective disclosure. When you explain every decision, justify every choice, and share every thought immediately, you strip away the mystery that naturally commands attention and respect. People start to feel like they already fully understand you, and once someone feels they fully understand you, they stop paying close attention. Selective disclosure works because human psychology is wired to fill in gaps. When you don't over-explain yourself, people's minds naturally start filling in the blanks, often with more curiosity and respect than the full explanation would have earned. Mystery creates a kind of psychological gravity. People lean in, trying to understand what they don't fully know, and that leaning in is where real influence lives. Think about people who command attention without saying much at all. They're not louder than everyone else. They're not oversharing every detail of their lives, their plans, or their reasoning. Their restraint makes every word they do choose to share feel more valuable, simply because it isn't handed out constantly. When someone rarely explains themselves and then chooses to explain something specific, people listen far more closely than they would to someone who explains everything all the time. This doesn't mean becoming cold, secretive, or dishonest. It means understanding that constant explanation often weakens your position rather than strengthening it. Every time you justify yourself excessively, you signal, even unintentionally, that you need approval or validation. But when you speak with calm confidence, sharing only what's necessary, you signal something far more powerful, that your decisions don't require external permission. Machiavelli understood that rulers who revealed every strategy, every weakness, and every plan became vulnerable to manipulation and betrayal. The same principle applies far beyond politics. In everyday life, the people who reveal less often move with more strength, simply because others can never fully predict their next move or fully exploit their next weakness. Saying less doesn't mean saying nothing. It means choosing your words with intention, understanding that mystery, when used wisely, often creates more influence than constant explanation ever could. The next time you feel the urge to explain yourself endlessly, pause. Consider whether silence, restraint, and selective disclosure might carry far more weight than another paragraph of justification ever will. Most people believe influence comes from confidence, intelligence, or perfect arguments. Machiavelli understood something deeper. People rarely act on facts alone. They act on perception, certainty, emotion, and the stories their minds create under pressure. The 7 strategies you've learned today aren't magic tricks. They're patterns that shape the way people think, react, and make decisions every single day, whether anyone notices it happening or not. Making someone question their own thinking, understanding the invisible forces behind every decision, creating confusion without conflict, letting silence do the talking, becoming impossible to predict, changing the battlefield before anyone notices, and revealing less while influencing more. Use them wisely. Not to manipulate people without purpose, but to recognize hidden influence when it's used against you. To stay mentally composed under pressure, and to never allow someone else to quietly control your judgment without your awareness. Because the greatest advantage you can ever have isn't the ability to confuse everyone around you. It's the ability to stay clear-minded while everyone else is trapped in confusion. If this video opened your eyes to something you never noticed before, hit that like button right now. It genuinely helps this channel grow. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next lesson on strategy, psychology, and the hidden forces that shape human behavior. Stay sharp, stay aware, and never let anyone else write the story of your own mind.